Hello everyone, and welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. Today we're going to continue reading stories from Dangerous Visions by Harlan Ellison. And today's story is a very interesting one. It might be one of the most interesting ones in this collection. We'll see as time goes on. But this one is particularly interesting because it is the longest, and that is Phillip Jose Farmer's Riders of the Purple Wage. This story tied for the Hugo in 1968 for Best Novella. It tied with Anne McCaffrey's Where Search. Like all of the stories in this collection, Harlan Ellison writes a preface to each of these stories talking about his connection to the authors or what he thinks of the stories that were submitted. And Harlan Ellison really had some amazing stuff to say in the intro to this story. One of the first things he said is that he doesn't want to play any favorites. Then he proceeds to do so and says he thinks this is probably the best story in the entire collection. And of course it did win the Hugo, so a lot of people I think agreed with Ellison. He tells the story that Farmer wrote the initial story and then asked for more time unpaid to expand it, which Harlan Ellison gladly gave him, and of course did pay him for the time that he took to expand it. And it became, of course, the longest in the collection because of that. Harlan also discusses Farmer's earlier work, which is called The Lovers, which I believe is one of his first ever publications. I think it was originally released in the August 1952 issue of Startling Stories. And what Harlan talks about is the fact that this story, The Lovers, absolutely broke the taboo of sex in science fiction. Before that, nobody really wrote about sex in their science fiction. That can't be 100% true, but it was very rare indeed. I do have a hardback copy of The Lovers. This is a very groundbreaking work, as Harlan said, in science fiction. This is a later hardback edition of it. I haven't read it yet. This is the first Farmer that I've read, and we'll get into that in just a bit. But I believe that this story, The Lovers, is why Harlan initially wanted him to be in this collection anyway. He really enjoyed that story, and I think that, of course, the concept of breaking a taboo was very exciting to Harlan Ellison. That's what he wanted to... This entire concept of Dangerous Visions was for him about writers breaking taboos, doing new things in science fiction. So that, I believe, is why he asked Phillip Jose Farmer to be a part of this collection. The story of The Lovers is about a human and an extraterrestrial or alien having a sexual relationship. And it really did send a shockwave through the community when it first came out. It did win him a Hugo for Best New Sci-Fi Author or Artist in 1953. So his first Hugo was in 1953 after he wrote The Lovers. His second Hugo was actually for this story that we're talking about today, The Riders of the Purple Wage. And Harlan stops talking about him there, of course, because this story was written before anybody knew it was going to win the Hugo and all of that. But I just want to go on really quick and talk a little bit more about Farmer before we jump into Riders of the Purple Wage. So when I decided I wanted to start reading sci-fi, I just started collecting things from estate sales and garage sales, anything that looked sci-fi, and then just kind of started reading at random whatever I could find. But also I was studying about sci-fi at the time, just doing research whenever I had a few extra minutes, and Farmer kept coming up, and I eventually came across a description of one of his earlier novels, To Your Scattered Bodies Go, which is part of the River World series. And I loved the concept. Just real quick, when people die, they go to this world where the whole world is nothing but the banks of this river. and all the humans that have died before show up in this other world on the banks of the river. And there's, I think, Mark Twain is in here. Alice Liddell, who was the little girl that hung out with Lewis Carroll that Alice in Wonderland was based on. All of these different historical characters are in this, and I really liked the idea, and I was interested in the idea of that. So I was very happy. This is my copy. It's not a first edition, but what I love about this edition is that it is signed. I don't know if you can see that, by Phillip Jose Farmer. So I'm glad to have that. And this has been on my to be read list for a long time. So I have been looking forward to reading anything by Farmer for quite a while. So when it came up in Dangerous Visions, I was very happy because I would finally get a chance to read him. Anyway, that novel, To Your Scattered Bodies Go, won him his third Hugo, and that was for Best Novel in 1972. One last thing before I move on to the story itself. One of the most interesting things about Farmer is that he really loved the concept of crossover fiction, almost to the point of fan fiction. And when I say fan fiction, I don't mean it in a negative way, the way that a lot of people do. I like fan fiction. I like the idea of a community embracing a concept and taking it into different places. I know it can get disgusting, and I'm not into that, but I like the concept of people loving something so much that they want more of it. And I feel like Farmer was like that. He was a fan of science fiction as well as a writer, and he really did a ton of crossovers. He did Tarzan, and the way it's described on Wiki is that, or I think it's a quote from him saying that it would be, he wanted it to be Tarzan as if it was written by William S. Burroughs instead of the person who actually wrote it, Edgar Rice Burroughs. He obviously loves puns. We'll get into that later. But he also wrote a novel called Venus on the Half Shell, and he wrote it under a pseudonym, Kilgore Trout. And anybody that's a Kurt Vonnegut fan will know that Kilgore Trout is a fictional science fiction writer that he made up and put in a lot of his works. And Farmer liked Vonnegut's work so much that he wrote his own novel from the point of view of Kilgore Trout, which Vonnegut agreed to. And then people started thinking that it was actually secretly a Vonnegut novel. And Vonnegut didn't like that and got really kind of mad about it and didn't want Farmer to do any more of those, even though he had more planned. And last but not least, he won a few Lifetime Achievement Awards just for his large amount of work that he added to the science fiction canon. He won these in the early 2000s. All right, on to the story. Riders of the Purple Wage is set in a futuristic LA, and all the urban environments in the world have started instituting what they call the Purple Wage. And the Purple Wage is a basic living allowance given to all people that live in the urban areas. And basically, everybody has started breaking down into smaller communities of just the people around them and accepting this purple wage. It gives them enough to live on, enough to have a house, and all their houses are these kind of egg-shaped houses. Egg-shaped has been a theme for the last couple of things I've read, going back to Zelazny and the Dream Master with the egg-shaped machine. So it gives you enough to live, but not enough to live wildly. So if you want to live even more intense than what the Purple Wage will allow, you have to find other means of making money. So it's not a complete communist concept. It is more of a balanced capitalist socialist concept. where a certain amount of your living is guaranteed. A level of comfort is guaranteed. If you want any levels of comfort over that, you have to find a way to make the money to get that. This is the story of an artist named Chib and his great 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 grandfather, who is secretly living with Chib in his mother's house in a room that is off of the kitchen. It doesn't ever really say if this room is hidden or not, but apparently the mother doesn't know that that Chib's great 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 grandfather is living there. We'll get into that later. That's it. That's the basic plot. The rest of this novel has some stuff going on, which we'll get into in a bit, but really truly, this is a philosophical, modernist, new wave science fiction tale that discusses what it means to live in a world where all of our needs are met. And that is the best part of this novel. I think the story that he wrote initially for Dangerous Visions was the short plot story, which is okay. And then he was so excited by the prospect of this world that he wanted to explore the world more. And that's how it became so long, is that it's just these disjointed, fragmented looks at what that kind of world means. And that was really interesting. I'm going to get back into this in just a second, but I am going to break this down into a couple of sections. The first section that I want to talk about is the prose itself, the writing on the page. When I was done with this, I went and looked for reviews of it. And there aren't a lot less than there was for Zelazny's The Dream Master. But the reviews I did find, a lot of them were people saying that, and even some videos on YouTube that I found, were people saying that they feel like this novel was too smart for them, which I would very much say that is absolutely not the case. This novel is very clever, and it would take many readings and a lot of research to break down every pun and every nuance and literary reference in this novel. It really would. And how much time you're willing to give to a piece of art does not define your intelligence. I think that when people read something and they don't understand it, they automatically feel the flaws with them. When in reality, what they're really saying is, I don't really want to take the time to break this down to the extent that I would need to get and understand everything. And even I have to admit, and I researched this like crazy, I did not read it twice like I did Zelazny's Dream Master. And the reason for that is I didn't enjoy the reading experience as much. I didn't hate this. I just didn't enjoy the reading experience enough to take the time to read it twice. But I did look back at literary references that I felt like he was making, and even thought back to some of the stuff that I had read, and we'll get into that in a bit. But here's what we can say right away about the prose of this novel. Number one, it is stream of consciousness writing, right? Which means it's just what people are thinking. Well, hold on, don't let me get ahead of myself. I believe that this stream of consciousness style is an homage to or done because of how much Farmer liked James Joyce, and there is James Joyce all the way throughout this thing. I have read Dubliners, and I have read Portrait of the Artist of a Young Man, his more realist work, Joyce's more realist work, and I have attempted Ulysses, and Finnegan's Wake, his more surreal work. And Farmer is obviously very interested in the surreal work in this piece. But I don't just see Joyce in here. And a lot of the stuff I've read, a lot of the reviews point to Joyce, Joyce, Joyce. And I do see that. But I also see a lot of the Beat generation here. Specifically William S. Burroughs. I feel like in many ways this is just as much an homage to Burroughs' writing style as it is to Joyce's. For instance, scattered throughout the text are his great 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 grandfather's thoughts, but they're in a form of writing because his I'm just going to say grandfather, just know there's three greats before that. He's writing constantly in this piece that he has named How I Screwed Uncle Sam and Other Private Ejaculations, which is the most Beat name for something I've ever heard. And it might be based on something. I don't know. I haven't read all of the Beat stuff. So I feel like that's also involved in the prose here. And it makes for some surreal reading. And a lot of it is hard to understand. I feel like probably about a quarter in, I was able to know what was happening most of the time. That first quarter, I should probably go back and reread sometime, but I didn't want to just now, so I didn't. There's lots of puns throughout this story, and some of them I feel aren't necessary. I can give as the perfect example the title. The title of this is Riders of the Purple Wage, which is obviously a pun on Riders of the Purple Sage, which is a Western novel. And I went and looked up the summary of the Western novel, and I can find no connection whatsoever to that novel and this novella. So he named the entire name of this novella is just a pun for the sake of humor, I guess, or wittiness. I can't see any reason for it beyond that. If you know of any reasons of it beyond that, please in the comments let us know. Okay, after looking at the prose, I wanted to move on and talk about what I specifically loved about the novel, which I've already said a little bit about. I didn't mean to, but I did in the intro. And that is the concept of this novella as world building. And to me, really the strongest concept of the entire thing is Farmer looking at what a world where people's basic needs are met would look like. And we see this in science fiction all the time, right? I'm reminded of the Eloys in The Time Machine, right? People that have all their needs met. So they basically lay around in the forest and do nothing. And even when one of their own is drowning, they can't be bothered to get up and go help them, right? That was H.G. Wells' concept of what would happen in a world where our needs were seen to. But then you also have stuff like Star Trek, where all the basic needs are seen to. They have replicators that replicate any food they want or whatever. And in that world, Gene Roddenberry imagined that people would focus on exploration and science, which is another awesome take on that, a less negative one, I think. And when Farmer looks at this in this exact same way, in fact, he talks about they have a matter converter. He brings it up at the beginning and then a little bit at the end of the story that they have created matter conversion in this universe. What he saw was different from Gene Roddenberry and different from H.G. Wells. He saw a world that would embrace art. And I found this really, really interesting and really wonderful in this story is the concept that people would embrace art. Because if I think about this, if I think about if all of our daily needs were seen to, what would we do? Right? Would we create hobbies that we enjoyed and put them out there for people to see. And I think about things like exactly what I'm doing here now, right? YouTube. I'm making YouTube videos because I wanted to talk about the things that I read with other people, because before I would just call my brother and talk about them with him. This is a sign of art being created, not for monetary gain, although I'm sure we'll monetize in the future if we're ever able to get to that point. But for now, just doing it because I enjoy it, right? I have a band that I love making music, right? And I put it out on Bandcamp whenever we have a new record, just because I love doing that. And that's where I think Farber got to when he imagined a world where everybody's needs were seen to. Art exploded in his version of this world. And artists became like celebrities, like Hollywood celebrities. And our main character, Chib, is one of them. He makes these layered paintings that use light. And they're like religious paintings, but they're also sacrilegious. And the entire run of this novella is Chib trying to get a grant so that he can keep making art, because if he doesn't get this grant, he'll be sent to Egypt. His mom's freaking out because his mom lives a more lavish lifestyle than the Purple Wage allows, so she depends on her son to bring in this money. But he's kind of a not a superhero, a superstar because of his paintings. And I like that Farmer has that positive outlook on art in the future. He also imagines that bored kids will start rebelling against nothing, right? All throughout this novel, Chib runs with this group or gang of kids that all hang out in one spot and like to go out and start fights, but they also like to discuss revolution. Knowing that the government can hear them, they purposely discuss revolution with no plans of any revolution whatsoever. They're trying to rebel, but they don't have a lot to rebel against, and I found that really interesting. And this aspect of these kids running around doing crazy stuff really reminded me of Anthony Burgess's Clockwork Orange. And I found it interesting because this novel is obviously super inspired by Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. In fact, Chib's last name is Winnigan. Instead of Finnegan, it's Winnigan. And when I was reading about Finnegan's Wake, researching a little bit to do this video, one of the people that they quoted as saying was most inspired by Finnegan's Wake was Anthony Burgess's Clockwork Orange. So it seems that for some odd reason, Finnegan's Wake had the ability to create this kind of story in sci-fi when people were inspired by it. I don't know. Like I said, I've attempted Finnegan's Wake and did not get far into it. However, I feel like this novel doesn't have the same meaning, the same overarching philosophical concept that Clockwork Orange did. I feel like Clockwork Orange had something really specific to say, and I think that this novel maybe very specifically is saying that kids would rebel against nothing. There's nothing to rebel against. It also talks a little bit about kind of the dark side of what would happen if people's needs were seen to, and they didn't really have any motivation to create. And we get a character really through Chib's mom, who's Mama Winnigan, who is addicted to gambling and alcohol. I don't know if she's addicted to drugs, but she's also addicted to she has like this salon, this gambling salon that she runs in their house. There's all these hanger-ons, and they just gamble all the time and have sex all the time. And she's described very rudely as very obese throughout the entire novel, and I think that she's supposed to be kind of the bad side of what can happen when you just give people their basic needs and don't expect them to do any more beyond that. So I think Farmer was talking about kind of the goods and the bads of what would happen in this world. He really explored this world. Another aspect of the world that he explored is sexuality. And I'm going to say right now, this is the part of the book that worked the least for me. I am by no means a prude. I do not mind sexuality in books. In fact, I find that often rounds out a book and makes it more enjoyable. But this one, I think, was a little over the top, a little almost adolescent in the way it described sexuality. Like, I felt like there was this incredibly intelligent sci-fi writer that was inspired by the Beats and James Joyce, writing this incredible concept of what the world would be if all physical needs were met. And then there was a 13-year-old that stole the manuscript and decided to put as many, butt and pee-pee jokes in it. It was a little bit ridiculous. It was over the top at times. Of course, in a world where all physical needs are met and people had way more time on their hands, I'm sure the sexual landscape would change. Absolutely. And I think that that's something that sci-fi likes to talk about, and I don't mind that sci-fi talks about that. So the aspects of the novel stating that, people had more frequent sexual partners, homosexuality was way more acceptable and normal in this world, which I thought was very forward thinking of Farmer and really awesome. That he even connects parents and their children sexually, which that was a little far. I didn't much care for that, but sure, I'm sure if we zapped into the future, there'd be so much stuff that would shock us that could happen. Who knows? The part that I didn't like was the really strange interactions he has with a woman named Benedictine. And her story is that she is claiming that she is pregnant with Chib's baby. And Chib really doesn't like this. And he doesn't think it's possible because there's this entire event with spermicide that occurs in this novel that was so stupid, disgusting, misogynistic, and pointless to the plot that I really just wanted to throw the book while I was reading it. And I believe this honestly, that Farmer put it in as comedy. I do not believe... I think if we went back in time and asked him, what was the point of this scene, he'd say, oh, it's funny. It's like Benny Hill, but with assault. I don't want to go too far into it, but it involves very terrible treatment of Benedictine and spermicide foam all over the house and into the streets, and they're slipping through this and trying to fight each other. It is ridiculous. And I'm just going to say the novel, at this point, the novella did not age well, right? I'm sure this was normal and acceptable in the 60s when it was written. In fact, it won the Hugo, right? So this must not have been a problem back then, but this part of the novel aged terribly. It is even the way that Benedictine is written. All the female characters in this novel are so disgustingly described. None of them, I can't think of one female character. Maybe the science fiction writer. He hangs out with a female science fiction writer. Her name is Huga Wells Herb Heistenberry, which is awesome. It's a mix of Hugo Gernsback, H.G. Wells, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Robert A. Heinlein, Theodore Sturgeon, and Ray Bradbury. Very, very awesome naming convention. She seems to be the only respected female character in this entire novel. Everybody else is shown as weak, liars. His mom is constantly described as disgusting and overweight, and really, truly, I think Farmer had some misogynistic tendencies when he wrote this. Perhaps, I have to say, perhaps he was writing Chib to be an example of how misogynist the future became. That could be it. I don't know Farmer personally, so who knows. But either way, it was not that part of that aspect of the novel was not enjoyable to read. It wasn't fun. I'm going to end with a concept that I think we have to look at when we look at certain works of art, or maybe all works of art, I don't know. And that is the concept of pretentiousness. And I know that is a word that gets flung around, so I want to take just a moment to define my terms here. The way that I was trained in looking at art and critiquing novels, I was trained that the definition of pretentious is when you do something for its own sake, right? When there's something that occurs in a novel that has no purpose but just to be weird. And the reason that I was trained this way, and that I continue to train my students with that definition, is so that we can look at art and force ourselves to try and just go, wow, that's weird, to try to get beyond that gut reaction, right? Stuff should not just be weird to be weird. It shouldn't. There should be a reason. And that's what's so fun about reading and interpreting stories, right? I just did Zelazny's The Dream Master, so I keep bringing this up as an example. The first time I read it, it was super weird and hard to understand, and I could have just said, I read this and it was super weird, but it just being weird doesn't really describe the artistic experience, right? I know I talk about Murakami a lot in Hard Boiled. It's one of my favorite novels. And one of the things that I absolutely love about it is it reads like a riddle. It is so weird and so confusing. But when you find the key through textual evidence, you're able to really enjoy the story. So pretentiousness is doing something for its own sake, which basically takes the onus off the artist. I know this sounds weird because calling an artist pretentious is not a nice thing to do, right? It really devalues their work. But the truth of pretentiousness is when you look at a piece of art and you cannot find through any of the textual evidence, and I'm talking about modern paintings, right? Big blue dot on a canvas, right? When you look at a piece of art and you are unable to find an interpretation that satisfies your desire for there being meaning in the work, right? So I may read Hard Boiled Wonderland and come up with a total and awesome interpretation for what I think that novel means, and somebody else could read it and say that's pretentious, it's just weird, I can't understand it, right? That doesn't critique Murakami as much as it critiques the person looking at the art. And that's not even 100% true, because I don't want to say that somebody standing in front of a piece of art and not getting it is stupid. That's not true either, right? I've stood in front of hundreds of pieces of art that I thought were totally pretentious and I had no connection to them, right? I guess what I'm trying to say is critiquing art, pretentiousness is in the eye of the beholder. What is pretentious to you may not be pretentious to somebody else, right? Critiquing art is all opinion. So, to give my opinion on this story, I feel at times a large chunk of this novel is pretentious. I feel like he was doing stuff to be funny or to be clever, right? All the puns. There's a huge pun that ends the entire novel. I won't give it away. It's a spoonerism. I will give it away. Fast jump like 10 seconds if you don't want to hear this. The novel ends, the entire story of his grandfather, which was very interesting, ends with a rocket shooting out of his coffin, blowing up in the sky, and it says Winnigan's fake. And of course that means the person, Winnigan, is not a real person. He's fake. But it's also a spoonerism for Finnegan's Wake. It's punny. It's very punny. But why? Why is it called Riders of the Purple Wage? Right? And I found myself constantly feeling like that throughout this entire book. Is why is the author doing this? Why can't I find any reason or connection to this? So overall, I would give this story a 6 out of 10. And I do it grudgingly because, not give the 6. I'm sad to give the 6. Grudgingly was the wrong word there. I'm sad to give the 6 because there were huge parts of this novel that I did enjoy. The building up of the world. But with the prose and the jokes and the puns, I can't give it more than that. I'm not done with Farmer. I'm going to read To Your Scattered Bodies Go. I am, because it sounds like a great premise and I've been looking forward to reading it for a while. And now that I have time and an excuse, this YouTube channel, to read as many books as I want, I'm going to read it. So you can expect more Farmer on this channel. But this one was a little bit hard for me. It felt like a very brilliant teenager that likes boob and butt jokes wrote a novella. And the best I can say is I'm sure there's great things in this person's future. I can't wait to read some of his other stuff to see how much he matured over time and was able to kind of hone in on his own voice more than he did in this particular story. All right. If you loved it and want to tell me why, if it doesn't seem pretentious to you, if you found meaning through the text, please go to the comments and tell me why. I would love to hear it. I love hearing everybody's interpretations of the text that we're reading. It's super fun for me. If you watched this till the very end, thank you so much. If you liked it, please click like. If you like this kind of stuff, please click subscribe. We're going to be doing a ton of it in the future. The next story that we'll be reading out of Dangerous Visions is The Malley System by Miriam Allen DeFord. Don't know anything about this person or this story, so I look forward to seeing that. All right, we'll see you all soon, and thanks for watching.